Okay. And we're not using feathers or any other kind of, thing. Whoops, did I miss that? How did I do that? Oh, there we go. Okay, you guys ready? All right. United States Supreme Court. Okay? United States Supreme Court, if we haven't figured it out already, is a very, very important part of the United States government. They're very powerful. How powerful are they? They're so powerful. They got superpowers. They can, leap a tall building in a single bound. No, they can make constitutional decisions and have them withstand all kinds of opposition. But make a note of this, because we're going to be continuing on with the Supreme Court. They try not to generally make major political decisions that the rest of the country's not quite there with. And we'll use that as we go give some examples and so forth. So for example, when we get to it, and you'll be learning about the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. In fact, I think, was that in the last one, or was that that's maybe the next one? That's the Supreme Court decision that used to say, hey, black kids, white kids, you guys are separated and the government can do that. Wow, that's racist. But over 100 years ago in the United States of America, a lot of people could care less. And so when the Supreme Court is given a case where really it's kind of like, that doesn't seem very equal protection-y, that's like a 14th Amendment thing. I mean, really, they should be getting rid of that. But public opinion was not really there for civil rights and the rights of African Americans and so forth. So don't be surprised when the Supreme Court doesn't go there. Another excellent example. What was the opinion of many Americans after Pearl Harbor toward Japanese Americans? Yeah, I mean, actually, it was interesting because it came up in 11th grade. I was showing a video about the preparation for the atomic bomb and the concern with the Japanese being able to hit Pearl Harbor. They were like, oh my gosh, they can take out our entire Navy, and then the Pacific coast is going to be open for invasion by the Japanese military in cooperation with Japanese American folks along the three states, Pacific states. I mean, they didn't say that, but it was implied. And so when President Roosevelt, with the support of Congress and most of public opinion, says Japanese Americans are going to have their writ of habeas corpus rights taken away and be kept in confinement, what is the Supreme Court going to do? Yeah, they don't typically get out in front of public opinion. So you don't see that very often. Probably the ones that at the time came out with the Supreme Court was people are like, whoa, was when they got rid of separate but equal, when they got rid of segregation. And we'll see they're going to do it very slowly. They got rid of segregation in the 1950s and said, come on, states, do it with all deliberate speed. It's kind of like if your parents come into your room, maybe this isn't you, but how many of you know people that if the parent came into the room and said, clean your room with all deliberate speed means 2022. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, here I am as a second grade, I think it was, in Virginia public schools in the early 1970s, and they are just beginning to integrate the schools. Yeah, I'll tell that story when we get through. Have you guys seen Remember of the Titans? Some of you guys have maybe seen that movie, okay? That was a high school right nearby where I was in elementary school, okay? And they were just starting to do some desegregation at that time. So the courts generally are not out in front of it. Probably the one that really kind of shook people up was the abortion decision in Roe versus Wade. A lot of people were like, I think the courts are maybe a little bit ahead of where the public is. The courts were very hesitant over a long period of time on the area of same-sex marriage. Notably, when same-sex marriage was found to be a constitutionally protected right, it was after, not the first state allowed for it, or the second state allowed for it, or the third. It was after about a third to a half of the states had allowed for same-sex marriage. And so the Supreme Court's kind of like, I'm getting a sense of where the public opinion is on this. So even though they're not elected and they don't have to stand for rights, they're kind of sensitive to public criticism. So maybe they don't like to get out that far ahead of it. Having said that, I was just looking to see where are things going to be with respect to the abortion issue? Because some folks are looking at the makeup of the Supreme Court and saying maybe Roe versus Wade is not long for this country as far as like the Supreme Court's rulings. And yet, that would be a big change. Is the court willing to make a big, big change? Well, that depends on who's on the court. You've got 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, appointed by who? Clinton, right. She's no longer there. She held out for quite some time. We have on the court 9 separate people. Okay? How many people does it take to make a decision that actually matters? 5 is the key number. Okay? And so if you're looking to get some big decision, although, write this down because it's going to show up if it hasn't already. How many justices on the court need to agree to have a case accepted? Because they only accept about 100 cases a year. Just 4 can call it forward. Right? There's going to be literally thousands of cases on appeal from all the circuit courts within the federal bench, 9th and 10th and 11th and so forth, all of the 50 states and territories and the military court systems and so forth. This is real easy. If you have thousands of cases coming up to be accepted by the Supreme Court and they only accept 100, what happens to the ones that they don't accept? Whatever the last decision was, make sure you have that. Whatever the last decision was, sticks. That's it. Okay? The ones that get accepted for argument get put on the calendar. There's a due date for, what are those written things that are really long, those written arguments that are really long? Briefs. It's not a clothing attire. It's briefs. Those are written arguments that are written down, and then they submit those, and then they have the oral argument. And then do they make their decision right away? No, you wait for it. And I think I covered this with you guys. When is typically like the last day for the Supreme Court, last time for the Supreme Court to announce their decisions for that calendar or that court year? I don't think I did cover that with you guys. You do know? No, I want the answer first, and then I'll answer your question. Early July. Early July. Okay? So when because I knew that the Supreme Court had like the same-sex marriage case in front of it, and people were like trying to figure out where that was going to be coming from. And I got a sense of, so it wasn't as much of a surprise to me. I think that was announced on the last day of the court's year, which is like the first week of July. They usually try to wrap everything up by the first week of July. Then they take some time off, July and August. And then they hear the beginning arguments for the next range of cases in the first Monday in October. Okay? So, very, very interesting. Who these people are matters a great deal. John Roberts, we put him down as conservative, but a bit of a swing justice. He's very cautious. I would say he's very, very, he doesn't want this court to get too far out ahead. And so he doesn't want the court to do things like find Obamacare unconstitutional, which a lot of folks are like, Obamacare, that's Democrats, and so, that's going way too far. And he's like, I don't think I'm going to go too far. So he was with a majority of 5, keeping Obamacare as law in the country, the Affordable Care Act. Okay? He's going to be on there for a while, fairly young-ish. Okay? Don't be surprised if he's there for quite some time. Clarence Thomas is the one, I would imagine, of the next 2 or 3 justices to either die or retire. Sorry, I think his health is okay. But some people suggested maybe he should have retired while Trump was in office. But he's like, I'm feeling pretty good, so we'll see how that plays out. Okay, he was appointed by George H.W. Bush. He's been on the court the longest. It was interesting, and this is one of those things where it's like people watching politics sometimes can become very cynical because we've seen a number of different times in political history a man who has an opportunity to move forward in politics, or in this case on the court, being accused by a woman for inappropriate behavior. Okay? I mean, it happens sometimes in the other way too, but So Anita Hill was working in the same workplace as Clarence Thomas, and she said that he sexually harassed her, not a good workplace environment, sort of thing like that. Okay? And so that came up, and ultimately, a lot of the people who believed Anita Hill, curiously, didn't agree with his judicial philosophy, which was more, what, activist or restraint? Restraint. What's another word for that? Conservative, I would say. And who typically appoints, what political party typically appoints the conservative justices? Yeah, it's kind of starting to line up that way. It wasn't always that way. When I was in high school, you get a little bit more kind of moderate justices being appointed, but I'd say it's become very polarized. The people who support Democrat presidents, the people who support Republican presidents are like, we supported you, we want you to appoint somebody who's really with us. So if you're kind of get a reputation in the law as being sort of a bit of both, good luck getting appointed to the court, because they're going to look at you and go, no, we want somebody who's with us on these things. So apparently there were enough people that agreed that Clarence Thomas had not done something as egregious, because he denied the charges, had not done something as egregious as sexual harassment. And I think it was like 52, 53 votes. Pretty much all of those came from Republicans in the Senate. Okay? So, of course, when Bill Clinton came along, who agreed that Bill Clinton had done things that he wasn't supposed to do relative to sexual behavior? And who voted for impeachment and to remove Bill Clinton? Republicans. Yeah, so that's where people get very cynical. They're like, oh, well, we either believe them, depending on whether they agree with us and so forth. Sometimes you will have people that are going like, can I just look at the evidence? Is there enough evidence? Because sometimes it's kind of hard. If there wasn't like a whole litany of women who were also making the accusation. Is that possible that there doesn't need to be a whole litany of women making the accusation? Was this a one-off? And even if it was just a one-off, could he have really done it? Sure, but it's hard. And it's still with folks, right? These are still issues that are there. In fact, we'll show you some more examples on the court. Yeah, we got Bill Clinton and we got Clarence Thomas. Stephen Breyer is on the court now, and he is, what is he, the oldest? Yeah, he is clearly the oldest. He's the one, make a note of that. Breyer, appointed by Bill Clinton, he's the one that a lot of Democrats are going, we love you, man, but you're old. Can people be old and still have value? Thank you. That's very nice of you to say that. Actually, if I were on the court, I'd be among like the younger ones. So, but the idea there is you can get a lot of bang for your buck if you get a new appointee, because it's chancy. Right now, they're saying Breyer should leave because a Democrat would appoint the replacement, somebody similar to in judicial philosophy to him. We just saw that with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed and she stayed on the court, arguably, to her supporters, arguably, too long. Because if she had retired during Obama's presidency, an appointment would be made and it would probably be somebody who is more similar to her judicial viewpoints. Alito, very conservative. Okay, his health is pretty good. What is he going to be, like 71 this year? Okay, so that's fairly young as far as court folks go. Sonia Sotomayor, okay, the first of Obama's two appointments. She would have been the third woman appointed to the Supreme Court. I don't have it right now. You can make a little note of this because this is actually going to come up significantly. The very first president to appoint a female to the Supreme Court was Ronald Reagan. A Republican, number 40, Ronald Reagan. He appointed a woman, Sandra Day O'Connor, from Arizona, and he thought, well, she's pretty conservative, and some of his supporters are like, I wouldn't put her on there. He's like, I think she's fine. I don't know. She seems like she might go along with Roe versus Wade. And Reagan's like, I don't think so. Did she go along with Roe versus Wade? She did, yeah. So anyway, when we get to that, we'll see that she actually wrote the opinion, a 5-4 opinion, keeping Roe versus Wade as the law of the country. And this was in the 1990s. That's actually one of the last two cases among the last cases in your handout. Okay? So, Latina, and there we go. So, Sonia Sotomayor. And then also his second appointment, also a woman on the court, Elena Kagan. Okay? So, relatively young, and she'll be on there for a while. More of a liberal justice, judicial activist. Kagan. Okay? It's kind of easy to tell because I think this is when they were announcing. A lot of times you'll have the president there announcing who his appointment is, and so it's really easy for me to find a picture. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You guys remember Obama, Democrat? and Trump's Republican. Lately, it's easier to predict it. Lately, okay? When Trump became president, okay? A reminder to you, Trump's first appointment had become open during Obama's presidency. Obama, it was a conservative justice. His name was, Scalia, Antonin Scalia. You'll actually see him in just a little bit because he's got a really funny exchange with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and they got along really well. But Scalia was a Reagan appointee, very conservative. He died on Obama's watch. Obama appointed the replacement. But the Republicans in the Senate looked and said, we're close to the election, we're in the majority, we're not going to go along with this. Politics can be a tough business sometimes. I was actually pleasantly surprised because the House of Representatives, I told you, remember, like if there's a close race, like in a vote count, that usually if that comes up to the House of Representatives, who are they going to pick, the Republican or Democrat, as the winner of that House race? Whoever's in the majority in the House. But I was like last week, I think this was an Iowa race. The Democrat lost by literally like 5 or 6 votes. And the Democrat appealed directly to the House of Representatives, did not go through the court system, wouldn't necessarily have won there either, and was hoping that the Democrats in the House would go, ha-ha, you are the winner. But that's not where Nancy Pelosi was and a lot of other Democrats in the House. They were still thinking back to make sure every vote counts with respect to the recount and so forth and the whole thing with Biden versus Trump. So they refused the Democrat in coming in there. But a lot of times, partisanship. So Trump, when he was running for office in 2016, he had a list of people who he announced would be potential Supreme Court justices. People deciding whether or not they could support Trump. If it mattered to them as far as abortion and other court matters, they would look and go, depending on who they were, cool, 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 cool. His list was very effective at maintaining political support among people who cared about the courts and who cared about abortion from the pro-life perspective. And Gorsuch was on the top of the list, and he was ultimately appointed and approved in early 2017. Okay? So he's fairly young. He's younger than I am by 4 years. The next one was interesting. Kavanaugh was appointed to replace a swing justice. There was a justice on the court named Anthony Kennedy, who literally was a swing justice. He was the one who wrote the opinion on same-sex marriage, a 5-4 decision. Okay, so Trump appoints somebody who's fairly conservative. Do you see that? You can write it down. Trump, Republican. Brett Kavanaugh, fairly conservative. He actually went to high school. He was like 2 years behind, because he's like 2 years younger than I am, 2 years behind a good buddy of mine growing up in the D.C. area. And so when some of this stuff was coming out, like, who cares about what you did in high school? Seriously, could something you said or did in high school come back to impact your adult opportunities? Could somebody say, if one person said it and another person said it and another person said it, it's like, would you be a good appointee to the Supreme Court as someone who evidences sensitivity to the plight and difficulties of others? I'm just like, seriously, do you get a break in high school of like doing silly things? This came up because folks, including Christine Blasey Ford, said that Brett Kavanaugh, while he was in high school, had sexually assaulted her. That came up during the hearings of Brett Kavanaugh. And some folks, so there was this whole big thing, do you believe her or not? And then there was a couple of other ones that sort of popped up, and as people looked at them, some of them are going, you know, even people who were there are going, I don't remember it that way, and I don't know, and who was there, and oh my gosh. I mean, this is back in the late 70s and early 1980s. Was stuff having to do with drinking and parties and stuff that went on in rooms, and was somebody there, were they not there? And anyway, this was all surfacing up. And of course, you get the same old template. Who agrees with Brett Kavanaugh that he didn't have anything to do with anything assaulting any females ever, including Christine Blasey Ford? And we all said Republicans and conservatives. And who tended to say that Brett Kavanaugh must have done all those terrible things and so forth? Yeah, Democrats. Like, oh my gosh, is it really that predictable? He was approved in a vote in the Senate. I want to say it was like 52 or 53 or so forth. Pretty much all the Republicans, maybe one or two Democrats went along with it. And I think maybe there was one, maybe two Republicans at most that voted no. But there he is on the Supreme Court. Okay? So, just be cautious of that. I would say now, with all the recording devices and all kinds of things like that and so forth, you guys have to grow up a lot sooner than I did when I was your age. Sorry. Just because, you know, you don't want to make the kind of mistakes that later you have to go back and go, oh, that was a foolish, youthful incident. Yeah, when I was 38, just kidding. I mean, when, you know, when you're like 17 or 18. Okay. So, who came next? Amy Coney Barrett. Amy Coney Barrett came in, was appointed in the tail end of Trump's presidency. I want to say the appointment came right before the election because Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And the appointment went through the Senate. The Republicans were in the majority. Amy Coney Barrett, you can see 1972. So how old is it? How old is she going to be this year?
53.
This year?
Oh, sorry.
When's her birthday? What?
I don't know. How old is she going to be this year? 49. This is 2021. Yeah. So she's younger. Yeah. So Amy Coney Barrett, and of course she was appointed and came onto the court. Wow! Oh! Well, let's just get to know some of the justices and so forth. Oh! Whoa! Polarization in America. So this was a bit of a switch because, she, as I mentioned, she took Ruth Bader Ginsburg's place. Ginsburg won. So do you want Breyer to live or die?
Are we allowed to talk about this legally?
I would be careful when you're talking about people who are holding these positions and so forth. Yeah, so anyway, Breyer is obviously quite up there, and Biden's up there too. But nevertheless, if Breyer retired, I'm guessing that he might. Yeah, and I would say like within the next year or two, if he's going to, he would do it now. Because the Republicans might gain the majority in the Senate. It's really close now, and all it takes is one or two shifts in seats. So we shall see. All right? A couple of other things that are kind of interesting. As far as law school education, this one I clipped out when Kagan was appointed to the court. Harvard, Yale, Harvard, Yale, Harvard, Yale. I think they've mixed it up a little bit. I think there might be two other law schools that are represented on the United States Supreme Court. So even among the activist and judicial restraint types, there's a lot of, like, some pretty special. I went to the University of Idaho Law School, and I got as good an education as anyway, whatever. So some of these are a little bit harder to get into, but yeah, a lot of them end up being appointed as clerks, because I did a clerkship for the Idaho Supreme Court. Some of these guys did clerkships on the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, I want to say Kavanaugh was the United States Supreme Court clerk, one of the two or three clerks, one of the Supreme Court justices do their job. So, similarity there. Who's more powerful? I love this cartoon. This happened to be during Obama's presidency and so forth. With respect to interpreting things like the Constitution, the Supreme Court's got a lot more power. And I want to show you some video things here to help explain some of the things. And we'll do a little personality comparison between two United States Supreme Court justices. The first one, it's kind of interesting because what I'm going to play for you, you can make note of this. This is a clip from a State of the Union address by President Obama. He's giving this to a televised audience. Obviously, he's in Congress, he's in the House of Representatives giving this speech. The people who are in attendance, members of the House, members of the Senate, right there on the floor. The gallery, you've got other kinds of people and so forth too. On the floor, you have cabinet members, people who work for Obama. And you have like the Joint Chiefs of Staff and so forth for the military. And you also have representation of some of the justices of the Supreme Court. They haven't been going as often. In fact, some of them don't go at all. In fact, this is the last time that Samuel Alito went because he doesn't appreciate it when a president makes a political argument about a Supreme Court case that he disagreed with while the justice is right there sitting. The justices always get up at the beginning and stand and applaud, and at the very end they'll stand and applaud. But in the middle of the speech, there's people bumping up and down, Republicans and Democrats and so forth. Usually the ones bumping up the most, during an Obama speech it would be Democrats standing up and applauding, probably interrupting at least 20, 30 times. During a Trump speech it would be the Republicans standing up and applauding and so forth. But the justices stay right there. But watch Alito's face when Obama directly criticizes a Supreme Court opinion that he wrote. And it has to do with campaign finance. It's kind of hard to explain and so forth. But nevertheless, the gist is Obama's criticizing the Supreme Court decision, and Alito, he ain't happy. No, he ain't.
It's time to put strict limits on the
Pause for a moment. His vice president sitting right behind him. Speaker of the House at the time. Yep.
contributions the lobbyists give to candidates for federal office. With all due deference to separation of powers, last week the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests.
Pause right here. Who's this? Chief Justice Roberts. This is Kennedy, who swing justice retired, and Kavanaugh took his place, so that was a shift to the right. Who's that? Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Very good. Who's that? Breyer. Very good. Another old one on the court. That's Samuel Alito. Look, his brows are already starting to furrow. And then there is Sotomayor. So I think this is before Kagan was appointed.
Including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
Oof. He's like, who's still in power? Who's still holding office? He is, yeah, Alito is. I mean, presidents can be there with a lot of power for 8 years. But he didn't like it too much. It had to do with, we'll get into this when we get into the First Amendment, as far as like political contributions and so forth. The Supreme Court said free speech, you can make all kinds of various different political contributions. At times, various different groups will want to limit that. We'll actually get into some more of those details in our last unit. But who gets the final word on whether a political contribution is free speech or a violation of federal law? Supreme Court, because that's a First Amendment constitutional right. The Supreme Court gets the final say on that, unless you amend the Constitution. Good luck with that. Okay. This next one, I love this one because this is Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her good buddy Antonin Scalia. Ginsburg, liberal. This is not. This is just a CNN guy, and he actually botches it initially. You're going to hear an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia. And they're going to talk about like what happened that time they went to this the State of the Union address, and one of them fell asleep.
Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg says she was, quote, 100% sober.
No, she wasn't.
President's State of
That's
the
not what she
Union
said.
address last month. At a panel discussion on Thursday, Ginsburg talked about this photo, which shows her nodding off during the president's speech. The 81-year-old, thankfully, had her colleagues beside her to nudge her awake from time to time.
You went to the State of the Union this year
And that's Scalia.
fell asleep. As I often do.
Serve you,
That's Scalia.
And it,
serve you right, I say.
the audience, for the most part, is great because they're bobbing up and down all the time.
Standing up and applauding.
Stone-faced, sober judges, but we're not, at least I wasn't, 100%.
I was not
before we went to
100%
the State
sober.
of the Union. We had dinner together.
forgive me there, she was not 100% sober, she said there. Ginsburg saying that Justice Kennedy brought a bottle of fine California wine to dinner, and she simply couldn't refuse it.
Interesting point. Let's pause right there. Interesting point. And make a note of this. Even though these justices are very on opposite sides on some of their judicial opinions and so forth, they got to work with each other every day. 9 people. And we're not talking just about a couple of years. We're talking about decades for some of them. They tend to decide to put political judicial differences to the one side so that they can actually have strong personal relationships with one another. And one of the best examples was Ginsburg and Scalia. Which is very, 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 very cool. Now, this is interesting because which element of American society really took to Ruth Bader Ginsburg as like, she the woman? Okay? Women and people who favor her particular point of view and pro-choice, among others. So they really, really liked her. I'll show you a clip, trailers for a documentary. A movie in which, was it Daisy Ridley played her in her early years? She did have, before she went on the court, and it looks like Bertie leave. Oh, because you're running? Okay, yeah, so whenever you need to dash, go dash, okay? Throw something. I hope it goes far and does not cause harm, but causes great applause, okay? All right, good luck, you guys. So yeah, the one who was in, what was it, Rogue One, I think she played. She was in the other Star Wars. Okay, anyway. So, and she played Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and so there's all this, and SNL, I'll show you this rap and so forth for SNL. So, I mean, she was probably, while she was on the court, and even still today, one of the most well-known justices of the Supreme Court. But a lot of the adulation, of course, came in particular from people who not only admired her, but agreed with her. And we'll actually talk about her because there was a very important case on equal protection having to do with gender rights of women, and it came out of, more on the details later, a case from Boise, Idaho. Seriously, Reed versus Reed. We'll get to that. But let me play a couple of the things just to give you a little bit of a sense.
I ask no favor.
RBG.
All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
That's ironic. So this is a documentary.
We welcome today Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
She's become such an icon.
Would you mind signing this copy?
I am 84 years old and everyone wants to take a picture with me.
Notorious RBG. Yep. When you come right down to the closest thing to a superhero I know. Ruth Bader Ginsburg changed the way the world is for American women.
I became a lawyer when women were not wanted by the legal profession.
Thousands of state and federal laws discriminated on the basis of gender. She was following in the footsteps of the battle for racial equality. She wanted equal protection for women.
Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law.
She captured for the male members of the court what it was like to be a second-class citizen.
The point is that the discriminatory line almost inevitably hurts women.
I did see myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher in those days because the judges didn't think sex discrimination existed. I have had the great good fortune to share life with a partner truly extraordinary for his generation. He was the first boy I ever knew who cared that I had a brain.
That's important.
She was a center of power on and off the court.
Every time Justice Ginsburg wrote a dissent, the internet would explode.
I came up with a couple slogans. You can't spell truth without Ruth.
I surely would not be in this room today without the determined efforts of men and women who kept dreams alive.
She had cancer like 4 different times.
I've heard that she does 20 push-ups 3 times a week or something. I mean, we can't even get off the floor. We can't even get down to the floor.
That's true.
Yeah, there we go. All right, and then here was a feature film That's Felicity Jones, sorry. But she was in Rogue One, right? Anyway, Star Wars people. Okay, all right. So I was getting Daisy Ridley is on the other one. All right, here we go. So here's your trailer.
There are 178 laws that differentiate on the basis of sex.
Women can't work overtime.
We have to get credit cards in our husband's name.
We're not allowed to work in
You think you can change the country? You should look to her generation. They're taking to the streets.
Protests are important, but changing the culture means nothing if the law doesn't change.
What did you say your name was?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I want to be a lawyer. I want to represent clients in pursuit of justice.
So they're gonna give you a corner office?
I wasn't what they were looking for. One said women are too emotional to be lawyers. Another told me a woman graduating top of her class must be a real ball buster. I worked hard, I did everything I was supposed to, and I excelled.
Martin Ginsburg will be signing all of our checks someday.
You're a smart girl, Ruthie. You married a star.
If the law differentiates on the basis of sex, then how will women and men ever become equals? I don't read tax court cases.
Read this one.
The law assumes a caregiver has to be a woman. This is sex-based discrimination against a man.
Poor guy.
We need to take this case.
This is not a case. This is a declaration of war.
It could topple the whole damn system of discrimination.
They think gender equality is a civil right. What's at stake is the American family. Let's put this idea to bed once and for all. You will lose. And when you do, you will set the women's movement back 10 years.
You don't get to tell me.
Did she lose?
I know this case.
No, she won.
Our lives. Who's it for, if not for me?
You've been ready for this your whole life. So go in there and let the judges see the Ruth Ginsburg I know.
We're not asking you to change the country. That's already happened without any court's permission.
The word woman does not appear even once in the U.S. Constitution.
Nor does the word freedom. Your Honor.
Always say Your Honor when you're making a point. Okay, good movie actually. Seen that one. And of course SNL gets on it. This is really kind of crazy. Taking their little spin on it. It's a wrap. Okay, so we get another little view. And then we'll get a counterpoint on the person who took her place and see if that Amy Coney Barrett will ever actually achieve the same kind of popularity, perhaps among women who agree with her, perhaps not. Oh, their heads are shaking already. Wow, we're not even going to hear it. Anyway, we'll play this.
It's crazy. You know, there's only like one lady holding the whole.
Kate McKinnon plays her in the SNL.
Hell no, and hell no.
Delete your account.
Can the real Ginsburg do that? I think so.
Now you know who I am.
Yo, tell him your favorite RPG decision, dog. I don't know. Come on.
He hasn't been attending my class. Okay, so here's the deal. Obviously, folks that are big RBG fans, they were just like disconsolate when she died and Trump got to appoint a replacement. People who looked at it were like, okay, there's going to be a different woman on there. Let's take a look. Amy Coney Barrett. Will she get the same Hollywood treatment than RBG? I don't think so. Why? Because she's a woman? Different judicial outlook. Some of you got, it means like, does Hollywood have a different judicial outlook than some other elements of society? Anyway, so we got a couple of things here for you. I just found this, NBC, a little background on Amy Coney Barrett.
She lived the legal career that led to her Supreme Court nomination. Amy Coney Barrett also built a family.
The president has asked me to become the 9th justice. And as it happens, I'm used to being in a group of 9, my family.
And Coney Barrett could soon be the first mom on the court with young kids. She and her husband Jesse, a lawyer himself, are raising 7 children, ages 19 to 8, in what friends say is a team effort.
Jesse and I have a life full of relationships, not only with our children, but with siblings, friends, and fearless babysitters, one of whom is with us today.
They live in South Bend, Indiana, near Notre Dame, where Coney Barrett teaches. Neighbors say the Barrett's house is a gathering place.
I was joking with one of her children today. I said, so you met the president today, and now you're playing,
It's during COVID, obviously.
What a life, huh?
Neighbors Rick and Nicole Garnett have known Coney Barrett for 23 years. Rick says family has always been her priority.
Do you think that will change if she is confirmed to the Supreme Court?
No, the particulars and the logistics will change, the schedules will change, but the basic orientation that Amy and Jesse Barrett have gained to their family, to each other, to their team, to their partnership, that won't change.
It's a very full life, but a very wonderful one. What greater thing can you do than raise children? Just that's where you have your greatest impact on the world.
2 of Coney Barrett's children are adopted from Haiti. Her youngest, Benjamin, has Down syndrome.
First word that comes to mind is, of course, proud, but it's...
Friend Kristen White, also a mom to 7 children, says Coney Barrett somehow always finds time for the little things.
I feel like I'm such a close friend because she answers my texts every day, but I think there's probably about 100 other people in town that feel that same thing because that's just who she is.
A friend, a neighbor, a mom, who could soon serve on the highest court in the land. For today, Ann Thompson, NBC News.
Judge Coney Barrett's Senate confirmation hearing is already set. It's scheduled to start just 2 weeks from today. No Supreme Court justice in history has ever been confirmed this close to a presidential election.
But this one was, yeah. And at the hearings, yeah, no, it's like the Republicans were in charge and the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, was like, we're going to get this thing done. One of the things, I found this, I thought this was interesting. So they had the hearings, right? Obviously, you got this set up. The senators far apart and everyone trying to keep far apart, and you have various different people testifying. I thought this was an interesting one. Here's somebody testifying on behalf of Amy Coney Barrett, not so much the judicial decisions. We'll get into some of that kind of stuff as we move along. In fact, you're going to have many, many years. She's pretty young. I imagine she's going to be on the court for quite some time. But this was a character testimony at the hearing. So we'll play this one and see what you think.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Feinstein, and members of the committee.
Former student.
My name is Laura Wolf, and I am a former student and mentee of Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
Notre Dame Law School.
Of her unwavering support, I am the first blind woman to serve as a law clerk on the Supreme Court of the United States. It is now my immense privilege to appear before you in support of Judge Barrett's nomination to that same great institution. You have heard over the past few days about Judge Barrett's judicial qualities, which are beyond reproach. But should you confirm Amy Barrett, the country will receive something far greater than simply an unparalleled legal mind. It will gain the service of one of the kindest individuals I have ever known. Her brilliance is matched only by her compassion, and her integrity is unassailable. I am not speaking in mere abstractions here. Rather, I have experienced these characteristics firsthand with life-changing results. Because I am completely blind, I rely heavily on assistive technology to compete on a level playing field with my sighted peers. Before arriving at Notre Dame Law School in 2013, I worked hard to ensure that the university would purchase backup copies of the technology I use. But upon arrival, I discovered that bureaucratic glitches left me without access to that technology. And on cue, my personal laptop immediately began to fail. Overnight,
That's never
I
happened
found
to you.
myself struggling to keep up in class, falling increasingly behind with each passing hour. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I'd been Judge Barrett's student only for a few weeks, but her graciousness and warmth gave me hope that she could provide me with that assistance. Even so, I maintained relatively low expectations. Based on my past experience, I assumed that Judge Barrett would simply direct me to the proper bureaucratic channels, which could still take weeks, if not longer, to navigate. But Judge Barrett did something altogether different. She silently listened with deep attention as I explained my situation, giving me the freedom to let down my guard and come apart. As a disabled person, I am accustomed to acting as if I have everything under control, when in reality the world feels like it is spinning out from under me. But in front of Judge Barrett, I was able to let the mask slip, indeed to disappear completely. I poured out all my concerns, not just about technology and my worries about failing classes, but all the burdens I currently carried as a disabled woman navigating a brand new environment. When I finished, Judge Barrett leaned forward and looked at me intently. "Laura," she said, with the same measured conviction that we have seen displayed throughout her entire nomination process, "this is no longer your problem, it's my problem." I can't capture adequately the relief that washed over me at her words. Her offer was rare enough in its own right, but even when such offers are extended, many unfortunately do not follow through. It's hard to trust an offer of assistance, no matter how desperately it is needed or earnestly it is given. Not so with Judge Barrett. Anyone who has interacted with her knows that she is a woman of her word. She means what she says, and she says what she means. When she promised to advocate for me, she commanded my trust. To this day, I do not know what Judge Barrett did to solve my problem, itself a testament to her humility. All I know is that the technology arrived promptly, which in turn allowed me to excel and to place me in a position that would eventually allow me to apply for a clerkship on the Supreme Court. This encounter was the first in which Judge Barrett demonstrated the depth of her generous spirit, but it was far from the last. She has remained a constant source of strength, encouragement, and solace as I have pursued professional and personal opportunities with no roadmap to guide me. Through her mentorship, she has given me a gift of immeasurable value, the ability to live an abundant life with the potential to break down barriers so that I can leave this world a better place than I found it. Though I am here today to share with you my story, the very best aspect of that story is that it is hardly unique. Those who have had the benefit of knowing Amy Coney Barrett understand that she possesses a boundless font of energy and a radical sense of love that she is ever ready to pour out upon those lucky enough to call her teacher, boss, family, and friend. Judge Barrett will serve this country with distinction, not only because of her intellectual prowess, but also because of her ability to treat everyone as an equal, deserving of complete respect. As a beneficiary of both of these qualities, I urge you to confirm Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah. Any feedback? Yeah, it's very interesting because I think, sometimes people get kind of caught up, as it should be, in the political, judicial positions of the various different prospective members of the court. And those are very important because those are very powerful because they can make all the difference in a 5-4 vote going one way or the other. I think generally, for the most part, in the two examples we've seen there, as far as personal qualities, RBG and Amy Coney Barrett, or ACB, whatever, I don't know if that's going to catch on as much, those are there. And it will be, I wouldn't be surprised if Amy Coney Barrett ends up having different positions on judicial issues as RBG did. And I think a lot of people wouldn't be surprised. Most of the folks that voted for her, Republican senators. Democrats, sometimes when they voted against her, they cited difference of judicial opinion. Mostly they were saying this should be up to the next elected president since it occurred so close. The vacancy occurred so close to the election. So something to think about with respect to that. Raise your hand if you like the personal qualities of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Raise your hand if you like the personal qualities of Amy Coney Barrett. Yeah, there you go. Raise your hand if you agree with the judicial philosophy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Raise your hand if you agree more with the judicial philosophy of Amy Coney Barrett, if it is more of a judicial restraint thing. We shall see. Yeah. So we're going to take that up now. Boom. In fact, here we go. Civil rights. This is where the meat is now. We've got the players all laid out, right? We've got the players. Now we got to look at the cases, all right? There's going to be some general themes, and I want you to go ahead and you can preface this. Civil rights, back of page 2 or whatever it says. Civil rights, we're going to take you through a whole bunch of different civil rights components. We're going to do like assorted rights and so forth, including some voting rights. We'll get into free speech later on. We're going to get into equal protection cases, criminal justice rights, and then, of course, finally, some of the most controversial stuff altogether, the right of privacy, which includes some issues having to do with abortion, as well as some other important issues. Here's what you need to know, though. And this is what you need to write down. And I think a lot of people know this instinctively. You may have rights, and those rights may be constitutional rights, but they're not absolute. Write that down. They're not absolute. I like this slide here. Sometimes the issue is not one person's rights, one person's right, but when the rights conflicts with the common good of society. You get a variety of different conflicts going on here. Sometimes you're going to have the right on one side, and you'll have a constitutional right battling with it on another side. Like you might have a constitutional, let's say you were a rape victim, and you want criminal justice to go against the person who committed the rape. Right? So what are your rights as a victim within the court system, within society, versus the defendant's rights? They're going to have some rights too. And sometimes they're going to be in conflict. Oh, and then there's the public at large. The news media wants to know what's going on. So it's going to be a question of balance. And we'll look at this. Some of the most very important kinds of things as we look through and analyze these cases is balancing the rights, and there could be several different components that are involved in these very, very intricate, important decisions. And sometimes it's society's interests. We have an interest in doing this. I'll give you a really easy example. How come students don't have complete free speech rights in a school setting? Is there an important interest that might weigh against a student saying whatever is on their mind whenever it is on their mind? Yeah, so it's the educational interest. You always get that when you're looking at this, although it's fascinating because I'm watching real carefully. I've made a new slide on it. The Supreme Court just accepted a case out of, I think it was like Pennsylvania or someplace. And this has been around for a while. There was a girl on a cheerleading team, and she didn't like her coach, and so she said some really mean, nasty things, the F word, blah, 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 blah. It was off campus, and the school punished her. And actually, the interesting thing was all the courts, district court, and then I think this is a state one. I think it was the state Supreme Court. If I'm wrong, then it's the federal one. In any event, all the courts sided with her because it was off campus. The school district is appealing, and the Supreme Court has accepted the case. Now, understand this. Sometimes, trust me, it's like if you say it in school, that's clearly within the bounds there. When we get to student free speech and so forth, we got some great cases for you guys to look at. But I'm fascinated because this one case has come up. The Supreme Court has accepted it. People are like, well, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? Some people are like, They're going to make a real crystal clear thing that students have rights outside of school and the school cannot interfere with those. Although, who knows? We'll see. She tweeted. Yeah. Oh, but he's not a high school student. Anyway, yeah. I want to say she tweeted anyway. It was social media. But it was outside of school. It was clearly a case of outside of school. So, yeah. Anyway, we'll kick those around. There's some really, really good, interesting cases that deal with those. Yeah. Yes. So, let's go into our very first case. I love this one. You ready? This is write this down. This is a Fifth Amendment case on eminent domain. You ready? Write this down. Here are the facts. Okay? So you can see this is going to be the Supreme Court deciding the case Kelo versus City of New London. This is a great one to start off with. Here are the facts. You ready? The Fifth Amendment says, anybody remember the Fifth Amendment with respect to when can the government take over your property? Go for it. Public space, public purpose, and then what do they have to do with respect to taking your property? Give you a fair amount of money. Those two component parts are very important. You ready? It's private property. Connecticut, beachfront property held by families for many years. The City of New London wanted to develop tourism to increase the wealth and prosperity and the tax base of the community. They wanted to encourage development. And so they're like, well, the best development place here for like businesses and hotels and restaurants and so forth is right along the shore. So they exercised eminent domain. And for those people that wouldn't sell their beachfront property to the city, they condemned it and said, we're going to give you a price, we're going to take it. Okay? The people defending against that said, that's not for a public purpose because it's going to be a private developer that's going to come in. Do you understand that? It's not to build a school or to widen a highway. It's going to be for a private purpose. Developers are going to make money off of it. The city responded and said, well, no, that's going to be helping out the tax base, and that ultimately helps out the schools and other kinds of things in the community. You understand that? All right? That was how it was. Anybody want to chime in on that one? I think I laid the facts out pretty quickly. Anybody want to indicate how you would vote on that case? Who wins, the city or the homeowners who are reluctant? You're calling it a loophole, but it depends on how the Supreme Court views it.
Well, it's a loophole if we're not involved in them, because if you're going to have private businesses make taxes that are back into it, anything could be eminent domain.
I suppose. You're saying that's a pretty big stretch. Do you want to chime in? No? Okay. Yeah? How strong are people's private property rights?
I don't think that if you draw the line there, then you could draw it anywhere. You could say a bunch of things of eminent domain.
Okay, Victoria. And then I'll have a vote, and then I'll tell you what the decision was. And again, the city's not building it. They basically are saying, you have to put this up. The city would buy it and then resell it to private developers. Are you ready for the vote? This one's easy. This is always easy. Raise your hand if you are in favor of the city, that they should be able to condemn the land and force them to sell. Raise your hand if you're in you favor the private owners, the people who own those. Okay, write this down. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the city. What? They said that people's private property rights were very small by comparison. Now, write this down before you go too far and you're like, oh, that's terrible. Here's what happened subsequent to that. I want to say every single state, under state law and state constitutions, expanded private property rights to say that will never happen. You can widen a road, you can do other kinds of things, eminent domain, but you cannot take it over for a private developer, even if it does increase the public tax base. It's in the handout. This is the 2005 Kilo case, okay? Yeah, that was the Kilo case. Next time, we're doing the Heller case. Heller Kitty. Ha ha.